But we do begin this hour with an historic signing on Siksika First Nation in southern Alberta. Last hour, the Prime Minister and the Siksika chief formalized a compensation deal worth more than $1 billion.
We're gathered today to right a wrong from the past. A wrong, as Chief Crowfoot has said before, that should never have happened. It was here, at Blackfoot Treaty Flats, that Treaty 7 was signed in 1877 by the first Chief Crowfoot. When he spoke at the time, the chief said that the Blackfoot people are the children of the plains, and that the plains are your home. He said that he hoped that the government would be charitable to his people. But as we all know, during the 1910 surrender and subsequent actions, the government acted dishonorably, including by taking more than 115,000 acres of your most productive agricultural and mineral-rich lands for the benefits of others.
Now, the settlement resolves one of the longest-running land claims in Canadian history. The money is meant to compensate the Siksika for the loss of over 40,000 hectares of their land more than a century ago. The federal government took it, as you heard, unlawfully to benefit prairie settlers and to build the Canadian Pacific Railway. The CBC's Janice McGregor is following this story for us today from Ottawa. She has more on the settlement signed in Alberta.
That's right. So for those who aren't familiar with the Siksika First Nation, this is a First Nation that's part of the Blackfoot Confederacy. The community is located about an hour's drive east of Calgary in southern Alberta. And as you say, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, Crown Indigenous Relations Minister Mark Miller, in the community today to participate in a signing ceremony with the Chief and Council of what's called the 1910 Siksika Nation Global Settlement Agreement. What you need to understand is that this resolves one of the longest-running land claims in Canadian history. It has been churning its way through the system for over 6 decades now. And after negotiators reached an agreement, a referendum was held in the First Nation last December. There were just over 5,000 members eligible to vote in that. And when the ballots were cast, 77% of those who voted in favor, setting up this ceremony. And the payment of a $1.3 billion settlement to the First Nation to do with as they choose. The settlement also includes an option for a very large land purchase, up to about 46,000 hectares. That's 115,000 acres of land that can be purchased and added to the First Nations reserve lands anywhere in the province of Alberta. That is roughly the same amount of land that was unlawfully surrendered by the First Nation in the last century around the building of the Canadian Pacific Railway. It included, at the time, prime farmland, resources of the First Nation, and also some of their sacred sites. And so we now understand from historians that process of taking that land was a corrupt one, that the government agents of the day used pressure tactics that were not fair, and they were putting the needs and the wants of the prairie settlers of the day ahead of the rights and the land-based culture, really, of this First Nation. The agreement that you're going to see signed today also includes compensation for another 200 hectares or 500 acres that was taken again from this First Nation for the construction of the Bow River Irrigation Project. If you know anything about agriculture in southern Alberta, you know that project, very important for making the most out of the farmland in the area, making it as productive as it can be. But it also resulted in flooding and sewage being released onto reserve land, all of that without the proper consent and permission of the Siksika people.
Now, Janice, the decision to accept this deal, in fact, was difficult for the Siksika First Nation. Why is that?
Yeah, and the Chief and Council have talked about this. As much as, it must be gratifying to complete the land claims process. Not an easy one to recommend a deal. This is a complicated thing. And the reality is, as they've said, nothing ever really replaces what their people lost. They lost over half the First Nations land base. They lost access to ceremonial sites. And perhaps most importantly, they lost their connection to the land, very important spiritually. Chief Ore Crowfoot has said that this settlement is not reconciliation, but the council does believe that this financial settlement, in effect now, as of today, will be able to provide opportunities, open doors. Having more financial sovereignty for this First Nation helps them provide services and raise the standard of living for their people.
That's the CBC's Janice McGregor reporting in Ottawa.